Masechet Gittin, Daf Yod Aleph. We're talking about this Mishnah here that says that a document that is made in a non-Jewish court and has non-Jewish signatures is still okay, like a sale document where the transaction is done and the document is there only for proof, and it's in front of these judges who care about their reputation, and so they'll make sure to testify that yes, in fact, this sale went through, for example, and therefore we can use that document. However, we cannot use it for Gittin abadim because that is not it's a Jewish law only. It's particular to Jewish law, and you need this to actually effectuate. You need the get to effectuate it, and so a non-Jewish court signed by non-Jews cannot effectuate the get. However, Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And he says that even for a get nashim shichur abadim, a document, the get signed by non-Jews in a non-Jewish court is kosher. We'll see why. And in fact, the only time it's a problem is when it's done in a not in a court, by hejot, just by a bunch of lay people. But if it's in a court, then both types are okay. So let's analyze this statement. Rabbi Shimon Omer, af elu kesherin b'hala b'nei kiritut ninu, and we ask, hold on, but non-Jews are not subject to the laws of kiritut. They don't have Jewish marriage and Jewish divorce, and so how could a non-Jewish court with non-Jewish signatures make a get effective? Amar Rabbi Zera, Yarad Rabbi Shimon l'shitato shel Rabbi Elazar damar adeh mesira karte. Rabbi Zera explains that Rabbi Shimon is following, says Yarad as if he's descending. Maybe why descending? Maybe like going down to a minority opinion. Anyway, he's following the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says that the witnesses signed on the get are not needed, and you could have no signatures at all on the get. What you need is witnesses to see the transfer of the man giving it to his wife. Adeh mesira, that's what effectuates the divorce. And therefore, it doesn't matter that this get was written in non-Jewish court. It could have no witnesses at all, and it would still be fine, and that's why it's okay. Hold on. Hold on. Even Rabbi Elazar would agree that if there are bad witnesses, then it's invalid. If there's no witnesses at all, that's fine. You can use it because we have witnesses to the transfer. But if there's invalid witnesses signed on the document, then that is a problem, right? There are a lot of cases where having nothing is okay, but adding something invalid actually makes it worse, right? If you make propose a bill, and so I think this is my opinion, we should take this policy, and it'll get voted in or not. But if I say, here's a bill, we should do this because my astrological science told me this is a good thing to do, well, then that actually makes it worse, right? You can't. That's not a valid source of authority. So too here, having invalid witnesses like non-Jews on the get is actually going to make it no good, even according to Rabbi Elazar. So the answer is Hacha b'mayaskinan b'shemot muvhakin. Oh, we're talking about where it has names on it that are clearly non-Jewish names, assigned by Jesus and Christopher. So you know that they're not Jewish, and therefore, therefore there's no problem of suspecting that someone will use the same witnesses for the Edeh Mesira. The problem, if there's no witnesses at all, then fine. We can assume that we ask the witnesses who transferred it, and we see, okay, the transfer under good witnesses. The problem is when there are names, and their names are invalid, then we suspect, these names are invalid, so perhaps it was transferred also with these same witnesses who are invalid. And so that actually makes it worse, right? So we worry that people are going to use the same witnesses. However, if their names are clearly non-Jewish names, then we can allow it. It's because that's the same as having no signatures at all. No one's going to be confused and think that you use Jesus to be a witness for the transfer of the get. And that's why Rabbi Shimon says, even Rabbi Shimon says, okay, even with the qualification that Rabbi Abba said here. Okay, good. So now we see that no names is okay. Having completely Gentile names is also okay, according to Rabbi Shimon. Now, what are some examples of clearly non-Jewish names? I gave you a couple of examples from a Christian environment, but the rabbis here are living in Bavel. What are some Babylonian non-Jewish names? Amara Papa, Kigon Hurmiz, ve'abudina bar shibtai ubar kidri ubati ve'nakim una. Okay, so these are all Hermes is named after the Zoroastrian god Ormazd. Bar shibtai is named after Saturn. Bati is a non-kosher fish. So you see that nobody would name. There'd be like a Jew naming his son Zeus, right? Or Poseidon. So nobody would do that in the Roman Empire. So this is in the Persian Zoroastrian Empire. And no Jews would use this name. So these are clearly not Jewish, and no one will come to be confused. This is a derabanan. The rabbis may gezerah. Don't use, don't sign it, because then you might come to use the same witnesses. But here, we're not going to use the same witnesses. Okay. Aval shemot she'en muvakin mai. La אחי עדתני שפה לא הזכרו אלא בזמן שנעשו בהדיוט לפלוג ולתנה בדידה במדים הם אומרים בשמות מובהקים אבל שמות שאין מובהקים לא. Okay, so now you're telling me that according to Rabbi Shimon, if it was ambiguous names, a name like Matthew, a non-Jewish name, it could be Matityahu, it could be a Jewish name. It's used both ways. So then, in that case, you would Bishimon would agree that if it made in a non-Jewish, if it was made in a non-Jewish court, signed by someone with an ambiguous name, who's not Jewish, then it would not be good, right? But so because then I might come to think, oh, I guess they use that for a demisira also. I guess you're allowed to use a non-Jew for a demisira. That's too confusing. It's not good. If that's the case, then it doesn't fit with the language of the Mishnah, because instead of in the Sefa that explains to Rabbi Shimon, instead of saying, oh, we only said it's a problem to use a non-Jewish signatures when it's done by lay people, as opposed to in a court. In a court's okay, and the only problem is lay people. That's what Rabbi Shimon's saying. I would agree that you can't use lay non-Jews to sign the document. Well, why would you make that as the distinction between an official court and lay people, right? The more important distinction would be within a non-Jewish court itself. When can you use signatures in a non-Jewish court? Only if it's clearly non-Jewish names. But if it's ambiguous names, then you can't, right? That's a much more essential distinction that we would have wanted to know, and Bishimon doesn't say that. So we're going to give two explanations to fit it into the Mishnah. Hachinami kamar. That's in fact really what the Mishnah means to say. When can we use non-Jewish signatures b'shemot muvakin when they're clearly not Jewish? But if you use ambiguous names, then that's the same as signing it with lay people, non-Jews, and it would be invalid. So we're just adding in a clarification phrase to say, yes, that is in fact what we mean, but we're trying to say it's the same as. All right. Or another way to read the Mishnah without this problem, Sefa tan Gittin mamon v'hachi kamar lo zkuru Gittin mamon difsulin ela bizman shenasu behejot. The last line is actually not that line of opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Right, look back at the Mishnah so we can see. The Tanakama says if it's in a non-Jewish court, a sale document is fine, even if it's signed by non-Jews, but not get nashim. Rabbi Shimon says even get nashim is okay. Okay, that's all he says, period. And then back to Tanakama, right? So Rabbi Shimon here is making no distinction, and so we are assuming he means when it's a clearly non-Jewish name, so that's what he would explain. And Rabbi Shimon doesn't make any distinction. There's no problem that he didn't make this distinction, because he just said a short word, so we clarified what he meant. Fine. And now the distinction here actually goes back to Tanakama, and says, oh, when I said that sale documents are good in a non-Jewish court, that's only if it's a court. But if it's lay people, then it would not be good. And so this distinction is for Tanakama, not for Rabbi Shimon. There's no room to ask, oh, why did Rabbi Shimon? Why'd you make that distinction, not this distinction? In fact, he didn't make any distinction at all. All right, good. So now that we know that, we're going to have a braita that is going to support the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosef. Kach Amar Rabbi Shimon Chachamim Besaidan. Rabbi Shimon said the following to the sages in Saidan, supporting his opinion that you can use a non-Jewish signatures in a non-Jewish court, even for a get nashim. Lo nechluku Rabbi Akiva v'chachamim. You see, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, they are students of Rabbi Akiva in the 4th generation. So now he's quoting a baraita from their teacher, from Rabbi Akiva himself in the 3rd generation, and his colleagues about this, and said they didn't argue al kol hashtarot aldin barkot shel goyim shaf al pi shechot mehem goyim kesherim va'afilu gittin nashim v'shuchrei avadim. There's no argument about any document that is in a non-Jewish court, even if it's signed by non-Jews, it's kosher, even if it's get nashim v'shuchrei avadim. Everyone agrees, and that is Rabbi Shimon's opinion. So there is some argument. What is it? Lo nechliku ela bizman shenasu behedyot sheRabbi Akiva machshir chamim poslim chutz megittin nashim v'shuchrei avadim. The only argument is when it's done by laymen, non-Jews. Then Rabbi Akiva says even there it's okay. Hachamim say no. In that case, it's not okay when it comes to financial documents, right? Financial documents. Hachamim say not good by lay people. Rabbi Akiva says it's okay for lay people. But this excludes chutz megittin nashim b'shuchrei avadim. A get nashim is okay even if it's done by lay people. Assigned by non-Jews. What's the difference, right? Why would Chachamim make a difference? Rabbi Akiva says it's okay across the board no matter what. Chachamim make a distinction because if it's a financial document and it's done in a court, that's okay because the financial document is only there as proof, and we assume that the judges have some, even though they're not Jewish, they have their reputation to uphold, and so they're not going to sign a document unless it is it's true that the sale went through. However, if they're lay people, then they have no reputation that they have to uphold, and then they may just sign any random document even without checking to make sure it's really true. So that's why Chachamim say that financial documents are only good in a non-Jewish court, but not with non-Jewish laymen. However, when it comes to a get nashim, it's a different story because it's actually more lenient. Because get nashim, we're following adem mesira, it's only the ones that transfer, so it doesn't matter where it was written and who signed it and who saw it, as long as we have the document and it was seen by kosher Jewish witnesses, transferred from the husband to the wife, then it's okay, and therefore it's actually more lenient. It doesn't matter, even if it was not by non-Jewish hedyot, it would be okay, even according to Chachamim and certainly according to Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so there you go. You see, Rabbi Shimon has good source that no one actually, according to his source, nobody disagreed that you can use get a non-Jewish, you can use a get that's signed by non-Jews. And again, here we're assuming that we're talking about where the names are clearly not Jewish. There's no reason to to be confused. Whereas if it's Jewish sounding names, then but they're invalid, then actually that makes it worse. Okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Af elu kesherin makom she'en Yisrael chotmin, ava makom she'Yisrael chotmin lo. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel offers a new distinction, and it depends on the place and the custom of the place. It says even the non-Jewish signatures are fine, but yes, that's only in a place where there's a law that Jews cannot sign on documents. So in a non-Jewish court. And therefore, since Jews are not allowed to sign, you can be sure that the signatures are not Jewish, right? Whatever their name is, even if it's an ambiguous name, a non-Jewish name, you know for sure that they are not Jewish. Since you're in that place, and you know for sure that the signatures on this document from a non-Jewish court are not Jewish people, therefore, there's no reason for anyone ever to be confused and think that maybe someone will deliver it in front of the same witnesses. However, if you're in a city where Jews are allowed to sign documents, even in non-Jewish courts, then we have a problem. Then no matter what the name is, we worry, maybe it's a Jew. Sometimes Jews have non-Jewish sounding names, and then people will come to make the mistake, and they'll say, oh, that time there was a guy named whatever, Matthew, and he signed it and he gave it, and he's probably not Jewish, and so therefore in this case also I think I can do it with a non-Jew or with an invalid witness, and so that will be confusing. And it depends on the place. That's Rabbi Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. Now we ask, makom she'en yisrael chotmin name ligzora to makom she'yisrael chotmin. While we're making gezerot, why don't you make a gezerah from one place to the other? A place where Jews don't sign, you should make a gezerah and say non-Jewish signatures are not allowed there, because you may become confused with a place where Jews are allowed to sign, right? I saw it done over there and it was allowed, and over there I'm going to assume it's the same over here. And if I allow it in a place where Jews are allowed to sign, and then it might be, in fact, a non-Jewish signature, but maybe it is a Jew, and I saw it, and he delivered it the other time, I might think that the non-Jewish signer can also be the witness to delivery. Why don't I make that gezerah? And the answer is Shema Bishma Michlif Atra Be'atra La Michlif. Okay, names are confusing, and someone might mix up one name for another. And since there's a name that might be ambiguous, and I would say, oh, I thought that person was not Jewish, and they used it. Oh, so I think it's allowed. And so it's easy to confuse names and not be sure what exactly the case was. But places are not confusing. Everybody knows in this place, only non-Jews are allowed to sign it. And that's why it was permitted in that case, because surely they did not use those signature, the people that signed there to deliver it. I know for sure they didn't, and I won't come to confuse it with a different place altogether that has different laws where Jews can sign. And so in the place where Jews can sign, then I'll know that I have to be careful, because then it would be more confusing, because I won't know if the people that signed are Jewish or not based on the name alone. Okay, now on the same topic, one time a group of non-Jews, Arameans, but it means anyone who basically speaks Aramaic, so it comes to be a term for any non-Jews. And so there was this group of non-Jews, not in a court, just a bunch of people, and there was a document that came, and Ravina said, "Oh, it should be allowed." But Rafram said, no, it's only in a court that it's allowed, but this is not a court, it's just a group of laymen, and so therefore it should not be good. And so that supports the distinction that was made earlier. Amar Rava, Haishtara Parsaa de Masreni Hale Be'ape Sahade Yisrael, Magbinan Be Mibene Hore. And now a different case, also related, of a Persian document. This is a document that's written in Persian, right, Persian language, and it was written in a Persian court. And it was transferred to a Jew in the presence of Jewish witnesses. It's a loan document, for example. And so here's the thing with documents and loans. If a loan is an oral loan, right, and so you said you'll pay me $100, and in front of witnesses, but it's an oral loan, then you can only collect from my available assets, my land that I have. But if I already sold land before you come to collect, then there's no lien on it if it's only oral. Whereas if it's a written document, let's say kosher, written in a Jewish court with kosher witnesses and all, then you can use that to collect even from land that I already sold since the loan was begun. You have a lien on all of my land. The reason why it makes a difference if it's oral or written is because if something is written and is ratified in court, then there's publicity about it. It's like taking an ad in the newspaper, right? Public announcement. This person owes this person something. Therefore, any buyer of land will know, oh, there's a mortgage on that land. Oh, so then he'll think twice, or build it into his price, right? Or take steps to make sure that his land will not be he won't have to give up his land. So you have to know that. So if there's a call, right? If it's written in court and it's written, then there is publicity. There's a call, and everybody will know. Therefore, it can. But if it's only oral, so there was just a couple of people there, and so it doesn't have the publicity. The person that bought the land in the meantime says, "I didn't know that there was a mortgage on it. That's no fair." Okay, so that's the general rule. Now we have here a document. That's a loan document, but it's a Persian loan document. So what's the law regarding this? Rava said, you can only collect with it from free property, non-lien, not property that I sold, only property that I currently have. And in other words, it's like an oral. It's like an oral loan. It is considered proof, like two witnesses to an oral loan, but it's not like a written loan. So it's something. So it is good proof, but not fully as if it were written. Now we ask, why should it be good at all? The witnesses don't even know how to read it. So how could they testify that, when they see this, when they see it transferred, what are they testifying to if they don't know how to read it? And the answer is bidiyadeh. Let's say they know Persian. This is very interesting Gemara because we get some of the real life, right? Most people did not know Persian language, but there were some people that did, right? They elected to take that in high school, elected into Persian or Spanish. They took Persian. Okay, hold on. In order for a document to be valid, it has to be one that cannot be forged. In our language, we would say you can't write it in pencil, right? You can't write a document in pencil, but it has to be written in pen, so that it can. In those documents, they can, even though they're all written in ink, but you can scrape off the ink, erase it, and put in a different number. So you can't use a document like that. And the answer is bida afisa. Now we're talking about where it was the document, the parchment was processed with gall, that makes the ink stick permanently. If you try to scrape it off, you'll see that it was scraped off. We're talking about that case. Another law for a document to be valid is you have to summarize the topic at the end, the essential summary at the end, so that you don't go and add more things afterwards. So that's an essential part. Veleka, in this Persian document, see, the Persian courts are not careful generally to have all these things that a Jewish court would require. Veleka, and the answer, de be mehadad. Let's say a case where it does, right? This case, it did in fact have all those requirements, and so it's valid for proof. And that's why, yes, you can use it as proof, and the person has to pay. And now we go to the other extreme. If it's written with permanent marker and it has the summary document, and the witnesses knew how to read Persian, in that case it should be the same as a loan written with a good shtad, a kosher shtad, and should be able to collect even from mortgaged properties, even properties that the a lender already sold, so that the borrower already sold. He should have to now. The lender can go and pay back. As the answer is let lekala. Oh no, because it's written in Persian court, it's not going to have publicity among the Jewish community. So among the Jewish community, when something is a loan document is written in court, right? Then they have some kind of poster board or something. They let the word out. People know, and everybody, they'll go and check. Maybe they have some kind of registry, and so people will know that there's a loan. There's a loan out connected to that land. Whereas if done in a Persian court, then it will not have publicity among the Jewish community. And that's why it's the same as an oral loan, and one cannot collect from the mortgage properties. Now, moving to Israel, Resh Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, Adim hachatumin al haget ushmotam kishemot goyim mahu. If you have a get nashim and the witnesses signed on it are Jewish, but they have non-Jewish names, what do you think? What is the law? Amar le lo bali adenu ela lukus velos vehichsharnu. Rabbi Yochanan said, well, we did have a few cases like this, but the names were Lukos and Los. Lukos sounds like Luke. Luke Skywalker, also one of the names of the apostles of in early Christianity. So Los meaning lion, would be like today Leon or Leo, and so these are these non-Jewish names, and we permitted it, and we said it's okay. So therefore, at least in some cases of non-Jewish names, yes, it's okay. Now let's analyze. V'davka Lukos velos de la shechiche Yisrael de maske bishmatayhu. Only those names of Rabbi Yochanan permitted, because really these are totally non-Jewish names. It's very, very rare to find a Jew whose name is Luke. I can't think of anyone today named Luke, although there's lots of Leos. and Leon's. It would be like naming your kid Abdallah, although it was a Jewish name, Chacham Abdallah Somech, one of the great poskim. But nowadays it would be very rare. Maybe you could find one. And so if someone signed the thing Abdallah, that would be okay, because everyone will assume, even if it is Jewish, will assume it's not Jewish, which is a good thing for Gittin, because since everyone assumes it's not Jewish, they will assume also that it was transferred in front of good Jews, and won't come to think that you can transfer a get in front of non-Jews. So those are fine. But other names that are ambiguous, and they're non-Jewish names, but there are many Jews with that name, and there it would be a problem. This may be like example today would be like Mary, which is basically a Christian name, but my grandmother, who came from Aleppo, her name was Miriam. She got to Ellis Island. They said, "What's your name?" They wrote Mary, and then she went by Mary, and her grandchildren are also called Mary, and so it's a pretty I wouldn't say common, but it's pretty found in at least in my community, people with such a name. There's also a bunch of Pauls, even though that's a pretty Christian name. It's not so common. But Mark is actually quite common, even though that's also one of the books of the Christian Bible. Okay, so you have a bunch of names like that. So those examples where it's a pretty common Jewish name, but it's not totally a Jewish name, so it's found in Israel, even though it's basically a Christian name. In these cases, it would not be, the Rabbi Yochanan would not say it's okay, because since many people are named Mark and Mark and Paul, many Jews are called that, so people will see that and assume, oh look, they were the witnesses that saw the transfer. Oh, I guess you're allowed to transfer with non-Jews, so that's why we won't allow it in that case, even though we would allow it in very, very clearly non-Jewish names like Abdullah. Okay, Itibe. Resh Lakish asks another question. Gittin challenges rather Rabbi Yochanan from the following source. In the Tosefta, Gittin haba'im medinat hayam vedim hatumin alehem, af al pi sheshmotehem kishmot goyim kesherin, mipnei sherov Yisrael shebechutz ha'aretz shemotehen kishmot goyim. If you have a get that comes from a foreign land and there's witnesses on it, even though the witnesses have non-Jewish names, it's kosher, because out there in outside of Eretz Yisrael, many people name their kids non-Jewish names. Okay, so first of all, just as an aside, historically, this is quite interesting that there was a difference in naming practices in Jewish communities in Israel and outside of Israel, and I think that's true also today. In Israel, all kinds of biblical names and Talmudic names have been revived, and very Jewish names, and people with other kinds of names get Hebraicized. Whereas outside, depending on the community, but in other lands, people tend to name their kids similar names to the culture around them, because just they hear the names and they're popular names, and so they do that. Okay, so that's very interesting. Anyway, Resh Lakish is saying, based on this Tosefta, look, a get has signature and has a non-Jewish sounding name. That's fine, right? Even if so, because Jews are giving their kids names like these non-Jewish names, and it's okay. But you just said that only Luke, very, very extreme. Nobody names their kids that would be okay. But other non-Jewish names that are more common is not allowed. Over here, you said it is allowed. So how could that be? Oh, here this Tosefta says it is allowed. How could Rabbi Yochanan say no? And the answer is Hatam kedekatani tamam. Oh no, it's different. You're talking about two different contexts. Outside of Israel, where people commonly name their kids, all kinds of common names, so then they're no longer considered non-Jewish names, right? Because they're so common and among the Jewish community, and that's why these are just simply Jewish names. And so we say, whatever the name is, okay, fine, they're considered. We assume that they're Jewish. I mean, you have to either ratify the signatures or say b'fanai nichtam. All the other laws that apply to it are fine. But just because you see a Jewish name coming from America, a non-Jewish name on a get coming from America, you don't assume assume the person is not Jewish. Whereas he was talking about a question Rabbi Yochanan was talking about within Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, if you see something that's signed by Paul, then you say, that sounds ambiguous. Then that would be no good. Okay, it sounds not Jewish. It's predominantly not Jewish, so that's no good. Okay, a different version of this exchange is not that Resh Lakish asked, challenged from this Braita, but rather he asked a question without a Braita. He just asked a question that happened to be the same as what was in the Braita. His question is, okay, Rabbi Yochanan, you're telling me the law in Israel where most people use Jewish names, and then it's kind of rare that people use non-Jewish names, and so that's why in Israel, for someone to name their kid Paul, right, that would be unusual, and so fine, that's not be allowed in Israel. But if someone's outside of Israel and people name their kids that name, then sounds like it should be okay. Another name, there's a couple of them. Franklin, right, had an uncle named Frank, named after FDR because he was a popular president, and nobody in Israel would name their kid that. So this would be, but it was a popular name when he was president, after he was president, so there was a lot of Franks. So then if you see someone with that name, you then coming from America, then you say, oh fine, yeah, lots of people, they use all kinds of names when they are in other countries, and so then there's no need to assume that it's non-Jewish. Only in Israel, then if it sounds like a non-Jewish name, we have to assume that the signatory is not Jewish, and if it's totally not ambiguous, like Luke, fine, then there's no reason to make it gezerah. But if it's somewhat ambiguous in Israel, then it's not allowed because people will confuse it and think that you can use it for, you could use non-Jews for edeh mesira as well. All right, fascinating discussion about names and places and the practices of different Jewish communities. And now we get to the next Mishnah. Ha'omer ten get ze le'ishti ushtar shichrur ze le'avdi im rasa lachazor bishnehen yachzor divrei Rabbi Meir. So a husband tells a messenger, please go and be a messenger and take this get nashim to my wife. Or he says, take this get shichrur avadim to my eved, deliver it to him, because I either want to get divorced or I want to free him. But then he changes his mind, right? The guy walks out the door, the shaliach walks out the door, and then he changes his mind. If he wants to change his mind, in either case, he can. It wasn't delivered yet to his wife or to the slave, so since it's not delivered yet, he can change his mind. That's only the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Hachamim omrim b'gittin nashim, aval lo b'shichrurei avadim, lefi shezachin le'adam shelo befanav ve'en chavin lo ela befanav, she'im yirseh shelo lazun et abdo rashai v'shelo lazun et ishto eno rashai. Chachamim disagree, and they say regarding a get nashim, the husband can retract, but not regarding the freeing of a slave. Why? Because the basic principle is you can do something for a person's advantage without him being there. Like if I pick up a watch and I know, you know what, this person will like the watch. Or example we'll see on the next staff, if I go to Pe'ah, a corner of a field, and I say, you know what, that poor person, he needs something. I'm going to take this Pe'ah for them. That's a more complicated case because then I'm taking it away from other poor people, right? But let's say the watch, no one's a sefker, I take it for him. So then it is his because I can do something for someone's good, for their advantage, even without their knowledge. Whereas I cannot do something for someone else's disadvantage unless I ask them first, right? If I say, oh, this person, he would love to buy this coat, so you know what, I will buy it on his behalf, and then he'll have to pay for it, right? I'm going to put it on his credit card without his knowledge. That you can't do because then he's paying for it, he's giving money, and maybe he wouldn't want to pay for it because he's being disadvantaged in that way. That's a general rule. Now let's apply it to these two cases. If a owner does not want to feed his slave, he doesn't have to. It's a good idea to feed your slave because if you don't feed him, he will die. He will not be able to work, and then you'll lose your capital. But in the same sense, unfortunately, slavery is like owning cattle. So in the same sense that you should feed your cattle so that they can work and so on, right? So you can, they make sense to feed a slave, but legally, master does not have an obligation to free his slave. Therefore, it's objectively better for a slave to go free, right? Better to be free than to be a slave. And could be even if he's being treated okay and getting fed, but there's no financial obligation. So the slave has no idea if he's going to be fed tomorrow. And therefore, here's how it works. When the owner gives the get shichrur avadim to the messenger, because it's good for the slave, so the messenger can acquire it on behalf of the slave. Just like he can be a messenger for the master, he can also be a messenger for the slave, even without the slave asking him to. And so he says, oh wow, that's so nice. Give me this document to free that guy. Wow, what a nice person you are that you did this. I accept it on behalf of the slave. Now, there's a machloket whether it actually takes effect right away. Maybe it depends on his thoughts, right? If the messenger says, "Okay, I accept it. I'm going to accept it on behalf of the slave," then it would happen right away. Or maybe it doesn't actually go free till he delivers it. But nevertheless, so once it's out of the master's hands, so it's irrevocable because the messenger could take it on behalf of the slave. That's the idea regarding a slave. However, when it comes to a husband and wife, a husband must provide for his wife. He is legally obligated to give her food, clothing, and shelter. It's part of the basic conditions of the ketubah. It's even in the Torah. And therefore, to be a wife is actually a good thing. You have guaranteed income for the rest of your life together, and therefore, some women want to get out of the marriage. Okay, but some women would not want to get married. Says, oh no, now I'm not going to be provided for. What am I going to eat tomorrow? And so therefore, it's up to her to decide, and it really is financially to her disadvantage to be divorced. And that's why the messenger, cannot acquire the get on behalf of the wife. So she's not divorced until he actually gives it to the wife, and therefore the husband at any point can go to the messenger and say, wait, I changed my mind, don't deliver, and he can revoke it. And that's according to Chachamim, so that is the difference between them. Now, Rabbi Meir says, hold on, Amar lehem, v'harehu posel et avdo min hateruma keshem shu posel et ishto. Hold on, regarding a slave, also, there is a disadvantage. So, Rabbi Meir says, why would you say that a slave is okay if that's your reasoning? What's the disadvantage for a slave to go free? If a slave is a slave of a kohen, master is a kohen, then the slave can eat terumah. Same thing is true with all of a kohen's household. His wife, his children, his slaves, they can all eat terumah. So, when he frees his slave, now the slave is no longer owned by a kohen, and he cannot eat terumah. And that's the same thing for a wife. Once he divorces his wife, if she's a bat Israel, now she can no longer eat terumah. So, to be made, argues, there's a disadvantage in both cases, and therefore in both cases, the husband should be able to take it back, right? Because even for a slave, right, that's what they argued on. The Chamim say, we agree with the Nashim, but Nashir Abadim doesn't matter. For a slave also, there is a disadvantage, and you have to go and ask him, would you want to be free? Oh, and he might say, you know what, I really like eating terumah. I want to remain a slave. So that's to be his argument. Chachamim say back to him, no, his right to eat terumah is not a right that he has as a slave, but rather it's only because he's the property of the owner. So the owner has no need, no obligation to give him any food at all. So the owner could give him no food, not terumah, not chulin, not any food. So actually, really, this is not considered a financial advantage because he has no guarantee, no legal claim from the master for anything. And so this is basically just a side benefit that he happens to be owned by, and therefore if he happens to give him food, it could be terumah. But it's a side benefit, not an essential legal benefit. And that's why Chachamim make a distinction and say, for a slave, always better to be free. For a wife, there is a legal advantage to being married, so it depends on her, and therefore it is revocable. Okay, Yatib Rav Hahuna v'Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah v'Yatib Rabbi Yirmiyah v'ka menamnem. So Rav Hahuna and Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, they're sitting before Rabbi Yirmiyah. That means Rabbi Yirmiyah is the teacher, and these are two students that are sitting in front of their teacher. And Rabbi Yirmiyah was dozing off. This happens. I had a teacher once that fell asleep while I always fell asleep as a student, but I had a teacher once who fell asleep while he was teaching. All right. Anyway, he stayed up late learning Torah. He's taking a nap. And so Rav Huna says, they learned this Mishnah, and I could see that according to Chachamim in the Mishnah, if someone goes and grabs money from a creditor, that is a good acquisition. In other words, if A owes money to B, now, A owes money to B. So B can go and, let's say he can go and grab A's property, he can go grab his car and to pay for his credit. Okay, fine. Let's say that is true. Now, let's say a third party, right? I know that A owes money to B. Can I go and repossess A's car and then give it to B on his behalf? And it seems from here, Rav Huna says that yes, you can. Tofes leba'al chob kana. Someone who seizes property from a creditor, yes, it works. What's the analogy? In this case, right, we're going to follow the Av Eved example, where according to Chamim, it's not retractable. So the messenger is acting as a third party, and he is, in essence, he has the freedom of the slave in his hands, and the master says, hey, give that back to me. And he says, no, I'm not giving it back to you. And he runs and he gives the slave his own freedom. And so you see, he's a third party, and he's taking something and giving it to someone else, even at this point against the wishes of the master, and that's permitted. So too, I can seize the car from A and give it to B, and that would be a valid transaction. And then the other student there says, what if it will be to the detriment of someone else? In the example of a loan, let's say A owes money to many people. And so now if I go and possess his car and give it to B, so then only B will get paid, and all the other people, let's say they has no money left, right, will not get paid. So can I seize something from A in a case where it will be in detriment to someone else? And Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, the other student, says, yes, because here it's a detriment to the master, because now he has no slave anymore. And so it made sense to him that shouldn't make any difference. And while they're talking, Rabbi Yirmiyah, the teacher, woke up. I really did have a teacher who would go to sleep, and we would have discussions, and then they wake up in the middle and correct us, and he'd correct us all. He was listening in his sleep. Okay, Amalehu Dardike says children, right? Is calling them, in a kind way, saying you're students, right? You're children, and you're saying something that doesn't make sense. And this is Rabbi Yochanan ruled that if you grab something from a creditor in a case where it will be a detriment to other people, then it's invalid, right? Those other people will come and have a claim and said, how could you take this car on behalf of B? He also owes money to C, D, and E. And so you can't do it. And if you'll say, oh, but look, in our Mishnah, you have the messenger is going to give it to the slave, even though it causes loss for the master. Well, no, that's not the same, because kol omer tenu keomer zechu dameh. Because whoever says give it, meaning the master said, here, take this document and give it to the slave, once he issues that order, it's as if he's saying acquire it for him as well, even though the master only appointed the messenger to be a messenger on the master's behalf to take it, a tenu one, but it's as if he appointed him to be a messenger for the slave, and saying, here, accept this on behalf of the slave, which you can do because zachin la'adam shelo befanav, right? The master can give the slave freedom even without him being there, because it's objectively a good thing. And therefore, when he says tenu, we consider it like zechu, and therefore you can't call this a detriment to someone else. It's a detriment to the master. The master gave it; he agreed to it. So you can't call it that, and therefore there's no challenge from our Mishnah. And so while yes, you can seize something from a creditor on behalf of the debtor if it doesn't harm anyone else, but if it does have a disadvantage to someone else, then it's not allowed. And that's what the Yirmiyah, when he wakes up, corrects the students. And tomorrow we'll see the full machloket about this case. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.